Hello everyone, in honor of Resident Evil Village and the 25th anniversary of Resident Evil, I thought I would share with you my top 10 favorite Resident Evil video games.
Resident Evil.
So starting with an honorable mention would be Resident Evil Code Veronica X. This was originally on the Dreamcast, I played it on the PS2. This is a very underrated game and in many ways the true successor to Resident Evil 2. And it actually did the prison island thing way before Revelations 2 with Claire Redfield. You can tell she's a more weathered Claire, more battle ready after the experiences she had in Raccoon City. And it does feature an annoying character of Steve Burnside, but we also have Chris Redfield and Albert Wesker here. He's a main villain, you know. We didn't see him since Resident Evil 1. So it was kind of cool setting up future stories, and that's why Chris is so jacked up in RE5 after the experiences he had with Wesker in this game. Overall, this is still a classic Resident Evil video game that I hope one day gets a remaster or even a remake. Starting the list at number 10 is Resident Evil 0. This is actually a very underrated video game. It's set before the original Resident Evil. We get to see how Rebecca Chambers ended up at the mansion. She's also joined by a convict, Billy Cohen. And this is like one of the early Resident Evils to use like a co-op system at the same time for puzzles or exploration or even combat. And I love how it starts off on a train. Overall, it's a cool story. If anything I have against this game is that the villain is a bit cheesy. It's a kind of a cool origin, but it's just like, that's a really cheesy villain even for classic Resident Evil. And the item management is horrible. I do like how you can basically leave items and they'll stay there. You know, that does make sense. When you discard an item, it doesn't completely disappear. So once you learn how to play and learn the functionality of everything with item management, this game is a lot of fun. But for me, I like to store stuff in item boxes or even have a suitcase like RE4 or RE Village. So the item management is a nightmare. That's actually the true horror factor of Resident Evil 0. The graphics for the GameCube are just superb, way ahead of its time, and I think the pre-rendered backgrounds like the RE1 remake really does the game some justice. Overall, it's a solid story, and for newcomers, it depends how your patience is and how well you like to have item management in survival horror, because item management with ammo and resources is key with these type of games. If you're used to more of the action-oriented Resident Evils, I don't know if you would really like this. This one is more like the PS1 era and definitely the first 3 Resident Evil video games. And I love it for that. After that, at number 9 is Resident Evil Revelations. I actually did not play this when it came out on the DS. It was on a portable Nintendo, and I actually played it remastered on the PS4, not even on the PS3. I basically purchased them right before RE8 came out, and I have to say, this is another one like Resident Evil 0 that's highly underrated. I love how you get to play as Chris and Jill, and there's other partners they have, Jessica and Parker. Parker has a cool backstory with BOWs. I love seeing how the different corporations come into play in the governments and what they use the viruses for in warfare. I like seeing that in the aftermath of what happened in Umbrella. This game is pretty much in between Resident Evil 4 and 5. It pretty much leads up to that mission at the Spencer estate where Jill and Chris fight Albert Wesker, where you think Jill dies in RE5. And in the beginning, you're on this like ship, and it has this ghost ship vibe. I just love Resident Evil when it's in close quarters and just you're exploring. It's just like the mansion but on sea. Some of it does feel a little cheesy. The Revelation games, the cutscenes feel more like the CGI movies. But that's not entirely a bad thing. Overall, this game is a lot of fun, and I think it has a perfect blend of the later on action games and the earlier horror games. This is a good blend of both old and new Resident Evils. After that, at number 8 is Resident Evil Revelations 2. It goes back to a prison island. Claire is kidnapped with Barry Burton's daughter, Moira. So, like, there's 2 stories at 2 different times. Later on, you have Barry come look for his daughter and Claire. And of course, we haven't seen Barry since he was talking about Jill being, well, you know.
Stay away from the door, Jill. I'm gonna kick this door down. Hurry! This way!
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
So he teams up with this little girl named Natalia, and again, it's a co-op system, but each character has different things it could do. Like Moira can have this flashlight she can shine at people and then use like a crowbar. and Natalia can throw these bricks and have a sense of awareness of when danger is near. So I find that interesting. CGI scenes, again, are like the CGI movies, but Revelations 2 definitely has that horror vibe. It's like Saw meets Resident Evil, and for that I respect it, and I think it's highly underrated. After that, at number 7 is Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 5 was a great game starting out on the PS3, and of course it's after the success of Resident Evil 4. It pretty much adopts the Resident Evil 4 gameplay and kind of improves upon it just a little bit. You get to play Chris Redfield, and he has a partner named Sheva, and it's in Africa, but what makes this game different is that it's not entirely at nighttime. There's scary stuff, there's horror in broad daylight, and that makes it so much different from the previous ones that came before. I love seeing this in daylight. Is it the scariest? No. There's some ludicrous scenes, so to speak, but there's just so much action where you can tell there's elements of 4, but like it went in the wrong direction when it should have gone in another direction, so to speak. And one thing that's really improved is a partnership. You know, in RE4, you're protecting the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, and she's like, Leon, help! This one, sometimes the AI does some wonky stuff, but this partner really helps you out, heals you with herbs or first aid spray, gives you ammo, and that makes the game so much more enjoyable. And this game is even better if you actually have a real person to play co-op with you. Overall, what can I say? Resident Evil 5 is a good experience, and somewhat of a conclusion for this portion of Resident Evil. Above that on my list, at number 6, is Resident Evil 6. I know what a lot of you are going to say. 6 is not the greatest Resident Evil, but I have to say it is a freaking blast to play. I'm gonna get the bad stuff out of the way. Too much action. Simmons isn't the best villain. Ada's story is a bit of a mess. I don't really like Jake Wesker, even though he does some cool stuff. I like seeing Sherry Birkin back. If the whole game was just Leon's campaign, oh my god, this would have been a great action-packed game, but then going back to the zombies, and I think that's why I like it, is the zombies. Besides Jake and Sherry, you know, Leon has Helena, and it's just a crazy opening. I remember playing it, I was in college, just seeing like the president infected, them having to put him down, and then escape this college university where he was giving a speech. That freaked me out. I was playing it in my dorm room in college, and I was just thinking, man, we'd be screwed if there was like a zombie invasion, you know, and I was by Austin, so like that's pretty much like the beginning of Last of Us. But I like how all these stories converge. Is it done in the best possible way it could have been done? Absolutely not. But you gotta commend them for what they try to do, and I think this could have been a solid conclusion if they focused more on the horror elements. There's hints of a great Resident Evil game. It's just the execution of this idea is what really failed it. But the cutscenes and scope are just epic. It's almost like a blockbuster movie come to life. Resident Evil 5 probably is a better game with better survival horror elements, but RE6 is just a blast that I love playing over and over. And what can I say? Yeah, it's my guilty pleasure, the Resident Evil franchise. After that, at number 5 is Resident Evil. Now this counts for both the original, the director's cut, and the remake. Yes, I'm talking about the original with the real actors and live action cutscenes. And then of course the GameCube is our first attempt at a remake of RE, and a superb one I might add. Resident Evil Remake really improves upon everything that was built in the original Resident Evil. They really took it far, and it's still ahead of its time and looks beautiful on the PS4. I absolutely love how you can play Jill and Chris, but just going into a mansion, this is true survival horror at its finest. Night of the Living Dead in a mansion, seeing the twist with Albert Wesker being a double agent, seeing all the creatures with this giant snake, the tyrant. There's so much in this video game that is just frightening. You just want to burn bodies of zombies, you really do. It's like, I don't want to mess around with that. You're low on ammo, but luckily there's item boxes. You still have to find ink buttons to save, remember those days? Yeah, I just love this experience. This is the game that started it all, and it's a formula that still works. Definitely one of my favorites. After that, at number 4 is Resident Evil 3. Now this counts for both Resident Evil 3 Nemesis and the RE3 remake. Yes, I actually really dig the remake. Now one thing I have to say about Nemesis on PS1, the Nemesis was far scarier. Like when I played the RE2 remake and saw Mr. X, I was just like, oh no, I don't want to deal with the Nemesis if Mr. X was like that. Nemesis wasn't a big deal, but in the original, he was a freaking big deal, and then following him in buildings and stuff. I was kind of bummed out that they cut out the clock tower portion, and certain other portions of the video game, they kind of designed Carlos in a different way. I guess they want to make him look less like Leon. RE3 on both of them is pretty much almost like a DLC successor to RE2, and I love how it's before, during, and after RE2. Jill Valentine is such a great protagonist. It's just like, you want stars? I'll give you stars. I love Jill in the new one. It's like, just so you know, this is the last fucking time, you know? And then that happens. 03 was very much ahead of its time, and you get to see more of the chaos in Raccoon City. The new one, as good as it was and more open, it felt more closed. It wasn't like RE2 or RE3 on the other versions where the world felt opened. But overall, I thought both versions were good. You know, RE3 Nemesis was a good way to end Resident Evil in the PS1, and the remake was a nice reimagining for current times. I played it last year, and during the pandemic, that opening freaked me out. I played it in June when all the looting and stuff was actually happening. I'm like, holy shit, that's my world. It's a fun experience whether you play the original or even the remake, despite its shortcomings. After that, at number 3 is Resident Evil 4. This is actually one of my top ones, and I had to contemplate the top 3 of this list. I actually just recently played RE4. Still a blast. If you go from the new games to that, you really have to get used to the controls. I used to be great at it in high school, and I played it and I'm like, I don't know how to control this. It's so different. You're just like stationary. But I do love the over-the-shoulder, and this is what brought it to an action-oriented series. This game divided a lot of the fans. I would say in retrospect, at the time, this is a kick-ass game, and it still is a kick-ass game. You know why? Because despite the action, it actually remembers that it's a survival horror video game, the European elements, being in Spain, seeing the Las Plagas with the Los Illuminados. The whole, like, president's daughter being kidnapped. Like, Leon's first days are just horrible. Like, first day on the force, zombie outbreak. He's a CIA agent. Oh, well, you have to rescue the president's daughter somewhere, you know? And it's crazy that Luis Serra, that voice actor who plays him, was Spider-Man in the 2000 game. This has a great story, brilliant cutscenes, graphics still are pretty good for today, you know? This game still holds up. I love seeing Ada Wong. The Mercenaries mode is introduced, and when you beat it on professional, I love seeing like a zoot suit mob suit for Leon. And then Ashley, once you get the night armor, it's actually not bad. You don't have to hear Leon help and then like figure out a way to save her. The only thing that's annoying is that sometimes she gets in your way, so I actually shot her more. It's not that monsters killed her, it's just like she got in the way when I was machine gunning some monster, and she's like, ah! And I was just like, thank you for walking into the gunfire, Ashley. God damn, Sandy the Squirrel, as Ashley was so annoying. But overall, that opening was so intense. Resident Evil Village kind of emulated RE4's opening, surviving until the bell rings, you know. Twists and turns, the merchant, what are you buying? What are you selling? You know, that was cool how they introduced the suitcase. I really love this game. This game is classic Resident Evil and among one of the best. After that, at number 2, I actually have 2 games tied. They're very close for me. And starting off is Resident Evil Biohazard. Resident Evil 7 was the game to get it back to basics of survival horror, but this time in first-person perspective. And it's funny because the original Resident Evil was originally envisioned to be first-person before they switched to third-person and fixed cameras. I love Ethan Winters' character. Going down to Louisiana has a very Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibe. And this isn't entirely Resident Evil. It's not a zombie, but it's still a biohazard with this mold. Him trying to rescue his wife Mia, and then seeing Evelyn. That girl is just so creepy. This really has some Silent Hill vibes, but the family, each member is just absolutely insane and terrifying. And again, I love that it's in this house. It went back to being in a Resident Evil format with like the mansion in the first one, but back to this house. The birthday video is one of the scariest things I've ever seen. I love the different VHS tapes, the filters, all the way to that ending revelation of what happened on Mia's mission and seeing that boss fight. That was just epic. And Ethan does survive a lot of stuff. Yeah, let me just say, Capcom does not like Ethan Winters' hands. They don't like him. This is a game that was a blast that really brought it back to survival horror while still having plenty of action, and I think it's a great course correction after what they did in RE5 and 6. Even though Chris Redfield looks completely different and more like he did in the first game. Speaking of Chris Redfield looking more like he did in RE6, also for number 2 is Resident Evil Village. And you know, I was kind of contemplating this list because, you know, Resident Evil 4 was one of my favorites and definitely my number 2, but I really love 7 and 8, and Village is a blast. I do have some problems with the ending of the game, not with Ethan Winters. I love what happens with him. Just the story feels like it kind of drops off a bit towards the end from the strong opening and middle. But I love Village. Village made me feel like the way I felt with Resident Evil 4 when I first played it. You know, that opening with lichens. Yeah, we're freaking doing vampires, witches, and lichens now. Forget the zombies. It actually worked. You know, the early Resident Evils has snakes, bugs, and all these other creatures, and I'm like, that fits. A giant bat? I'm like, why not have a werewolf? It hasn't always been zombies, you know. There's been zombies, but there's been creatures mutated by this virus. I love how they tied Spencer and his discovery of this village. That was great with Mother Miranda. That revelation towards the end was just fantastic. The opening was just like, what? I can't believe Chris did this. There has to be more to the story, and of course there was more. But having Ethan Winters rescue Rose, his daughter, really sets up this game very well. And you're just on this journey of trying to get your daughter back. Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters are just terrifying. Yeah, Capcom, they don't like hands. Seeing the Duke, that was kind of cool, having a different type of merchant. He does mention the RE4 merchant. Heisenberg was just awesome. The Benevento house, that mansion, oh my god. That doll was the creepiest thing. That doll and the screaming baby, forget lichens and vampires. That baby was the most terrifying shit I've ever fucking played in a game. If you know, you know. But overall, the gameplay, it's just fun. Using mines, the weapons, crafting. It's just so fluid. I felt like everything they set up in Resident Evil 7 was perfected to a T here, while also providing something that felt more like a Resident Evil experience. After that, at number 1, for me personally, is Resident Evil 2. Both versions, the original 98 and the remake. I think I'm biased because Resident Evil 2 is the first Resident Evil I ever saw. My brother played it, and we were scared shitless with the zombie dogs, let me tell you. But I love seeing the A and B scenarios. You know, the remake took everything you loved about the original, perfected it, and made it just enough its own game without disrespecting the original. Still stayed true to the original while doing its own thing. One thing I have to say about the original I liked much better is the A-B storylines didn't feel like the same story. They really felt like two different perspectives with Claire and Leon and just interwoven storytelling, where the remake feels like you're playing the same game with only some minor differences and kind of like continuity issues with location and where the characters are at the time. But yeah, it was cool seeing Raccoon City. You know, they took it from the mansion to the city, to the police department, to the sewers, and the Hive underground lab. The Birkin story was great, seeing how the G-Virus came to be. That opening cutscene on the PS1 looked so realistic when I first played it. Now it doesn't so much, but the remake, that's how you do a remake. Mr. X was terrifying stalking you. And yeah, that's probably my favorite Resident Evil experience in the remake. Still has zombies, it's survival horror, third person over the shoulder view. And that's how I like my Resident Evil. Anyway, that does it for my top 10 favorite Resident Evil games. I know this video is a bit long, but feel free down in the comments below. Let me know your favorite Resident Evil video games. Top 10. Let me know down in the comments below. Feel free to follow me on the Stardust app at Fred Film Fanatic. You can follow me on Twitch at The Dark Knight of Steel and Instagram at Fred Film Fanatic. Stay safe and healthy, everyone.